Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the EU-US Trade Panel at the Riga Conference. We have got a really excellent debate for you this afternoon, and I hope it proves to be something which you obtain a lot of new insights and information about, and also enjoy the debate. Now, we've got a fantastic panel here, starting at the far end with Barry In from the Open Markets Institute in Washington, D.C., who's one of the kind of trade philosophers of US trade policy. And we've got a group of European critiques to look at and scrutinize some of the American arguments, starting with Matusz Piotrowski from the Polish International Security Program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. We have got Ina Steinbuka as the head of the Fiscal Discipline Council of Latvia, and Anna Băceal, former Deputy Prime Minister of Romania. So we've got a good panel, and we've got a potential of an interesting debate. So what we're going to do to start with is I'm going to ask Barry to open up with some of the EU and US, some of the US views of trade policy, how they developed, in what the direction they're going, and then we'll try and have a kind of European reaction to some of the new US trade developments. So without further ado, over to Barry.
Thank you, Alan, and it's great to see you all today. And this is probably one of the most important of the many important issues that are taking place around the world at this moment. So who am I? You know, Alan gave you a little bit of an introduction. My organization, Open Markets Institute, we've been at the vanguard in the United States of sort of identifying the major problems with the neoliberal thinking of the 1980s, the globalization thinking of the 1990s, and we've had an enormously successful effect. We have kind of revolutionized thinking about competition policy in the United States and to some degree in Europe. The people that came through our group are now sort of in charge of the main agencies, the competition agencies in the United States, the FTC, the Antitrust Division of the DOJ. We have had a huge effect on sort of the understanding of big tech. Google, Facebook, Amazon, what to do about these corporations. Our analysis has been at the heart of thinking both in the United States and in Europe, and actually elsewhere around the world. And also trade. I mean, and this is actually how I got into this work, is looking at problems within the trading system. And my own work goes back in the framework that we're in now to 1999. And at which point there was an earthquake in Taiwan, which resulted in the shutdown of all these factories around the world. And that was the warning. That was a warning of problems within the trading system that we put into place in the 1990s that we did not heed back then, and we're now heeding finally today. We'll get back to sort of what that means later, but I just want to make 3 quick points, and then we could sort of, start the real conversation. And the first is that the Biden approach to trade is revolutionary in nature, and it's very real. This is a very committed White House, a very committed administration. It's what do I mean by revolutionary? In the 1980s, there was this change in how people address political economy. We call it now neoliberalism. And it was this market fundamentalism idea that we're just going to let markets run everything. What that really meant was we're going to let large corporations run everything. When you say markets are going to run things, it means large corporations will run those things. So what happened with neoliberalism is a radical consolidation of just about every part of our political economy. Globalization in the 1990s, WTO, it was the extension of the neoliberal thinking to international trade. And what we've seen is an extreme concentration of control over every part of the trading system since then. Usually by American and European corporations, increasingly by other corporations. We are now going through a radical overthrow of of all of this thinking. It's really put it into local terms. What we're seeing is kind of the thinking that was present in the United States and Europe just 4 years ago. It's now being overturned at a rapidity like what we saw at the end of the Soviet Union. So a lot of the people who were preaching sort of globalization circa 3-4 years ago, if you look at them now, they're like a Soviet economist in 1988. It's like, so the world is shifting under their feet at this incredibly rapid rate. So this is a real revolution. This administration is completely committed to it, and it is changing the face of debate in the world and policy around the world. How does this connect with security? This is a security conference. The goal of this change is, when it comes to trade, is security. What we saw, because of this extreme concentration, we saw extreme concentration of risk around the world. We saw choke pointing of capacity around the world. For instance, what I was talking about before, in Taiwan, 1999, why did that earthquake create these massive disruptions in 1999? It was because there was this extreme concentration of capacity to make semiconductors in one place. In 1995, that would not have been possible. Capacity for everything that we rely on was distributed around the world. 1999, semiconductors, one place in the world. Today, many things, one place in the world. This includes chemicals. It includes active pharmaceutical ingredients. It includes all kinds of electronic components. That creates choke points, and every choke point creates risk. So by moving to break choke points, what you're doing is you're breaking risk. You're creating a system that's more safe, that's more secure. That's why this issue of the revolution in trade is of such fundamental importance for people in the security community to understand, because this gets right at the heart of making the world a safer, more peaceful place. The third point, this is an enormous opportunity. Some people will say that this is what we're seeing here is America first. It's the United States is just doing taking a bunch of actions to put to concentrate capacity in the United States so we have more jobs. Well, that's there is one of the things that's going to happen as we go through this is there is going to be more jobs in manufacturing in the United States. There's going to be more jobs in manufacturing in Europe, in Brazil, in every place that's outside of China. There's going to be more jobs in manufacturing. But the opportunity is far more than that. The opportunity is actually to re-envision what a trading system should look like, to re-envision what an international system should look like, to re-envision how we live together in community in the world. So it's like there's been a lot of reaction against the Biden approach to trade among many folks in Europe. We actually are there's going to be a summit tomorrow. President von der Leyen is going to be meeting with President Biden. President von der Leyen actually understands the opportunities here, and she is moving to seize these opportunities. And I encourage all Europeans to understand this is an enormous opportunity. This is not protectionism. This is actions to take the system and remake it on a foundation of distribution and resiliency so that we actually have security and peace and opportunity to work together, not just to deal with the threats to our well-being, but also to rebuild a world in which we have the capacity to address all of the threats, sustainability, climate. So this is an enormous opportunity, and one thing that you should understand is that more is coming. It's like what we've seen thus far, the actions thus far, that's just the beginning. There's going to be a second round. I mean, IRA, the CHIPS Act, which we're seen as very disruptive. There's going to be a lot more disruption. It's going to be disruptive in the United States. It's going to be disruptive in Europe. It's going to be aimed at breaking additional choke points in China, such as on pharmaceuticals. It's going to be aimed at preventing the further slippage of capacity that is here and in the United States into China. For instance, BASF has been talking about moving an entire complex from Germany into southern China. That's not going to happen BASF may think it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. So anyway.
That's fantastic, as a kind of tour de force or tour de raison of the situation. I was wondering if, well, perhaps Anna, would you like to start by having little initial observations?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me here, and I would like to thank NGIC for kindly helping to be part of this great conference. Well, I very much agree with a lot of things, with all the things that you were saying, that mainly trade, it's a matter of security. And I would like, before making some humble observation, to thank you all for coming together to be part of this conversation, because I think it's one of the very important issues that are present not just today but in the future. And I can start by saying that I am an example of a EU-US transatlantic relationship, if I may put it this way. I was born in Romania, I was educated in Romania, and then educated at Yale Law School, work in the US, and then in 2003 quit the Wall Street and come back and enter Romanian public service and politics. And I was Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Justice, and now I am involved with the energy. And that takes me to what you were saying, that trade is a matter of security, and I will tap on expanding that energy is a matter of security. And I can tell you from my experience that US was the one helping us big time, and I've been involved in those conversations since 2019 when we were advocating to take the energy away from Putin's hands because he's going to use it as a weapon. And we've been saying that on, and some people didn't take us seriously. I remember the Prime Minister of Poland, so Poland and Romania, we were the, the strongest voice from our region, Central Eastern Europe, advocating that energy is going to be used as a weapon. And unfortunately, we were right. We wish we weren't, and that's very important to understand what the big influence of the US was stepping in and practically now not just helping us to gain independence from the Russians' influence. In Romania's case, we've been very lucky because we had a very good energy mix, and we had the nuclear, which, by the way, we were the only one in the region, and I'm taking a big pride of this one, because from the 1960s we were going with the North American technology, meaning the Canadian and with the help of the US. So what I'm trying to say as a first reaction is that you were very, very right to put on the table this special relationship, which is, in my opinion, the EU and US. And not just on the energy, which is incredibly important, but on all the other issues that you mentioned. And, US is the prime trading partner of the EU, and I think for the US, EU is a very, very good partner and very good, reliable partner. And if I could close as a first reaction, yes, I'm very grateful, but likewise I would like to see more presence of the US and Central Eastern Europe, because in this way you are helping us of finally getting away from the hybrid war that our region has been for so many years, and we live it today, where people are playing with just human basic rights such as energy, and stepping in with, including with the new technologies on the SMRs. I think it's a very strategic move that will really not just close the tides between the US and the EU, but certainly for Central Eastern Europe is something that is so much needed, and quite frankly, if I may say on a personal note, overdue. So US presence in Central Eastern Europe in energy, for example, is so crucial.
I think just on the energy thing, I think that's a very, very good point. I mean, one of the points about this issue of choke points and dependence, if you look at what happened in 21, 22, with a huge increase in energy prices, to think about it like this, what the Russians did is they cut supply. They knew Europe was dependent. Yeah. They cut supply. sufficient that prices went to in August 22 reached over €300 per megawatt hour. Now, normally, prices in the last decade have ranged from €9 to €29 per megawatt hour. So 300, more than 300. And that cost Europe enormously. The amount of subsidies the European member states spent, EU member states, was around €400 billion on basically protecting European industry and European consumers from that choke point. And it resulted, because we had to go out into the international market and buy gas at top dollar, we ended up having the first trade deficit since the Great Recession. So the point about when Barry makes the point about choke points and Anna re-emphasizes energy, this is an example of what happens when it goes wrong. The costs are in hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, aside from the direct security costs. They can be absolutely enormous. I'll stop there, but I'll move perhaps on to, perhaps you may have some observations to make.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this distinguished panel. Look, I would like to recall what happened 10 years ago. In 2013. In 2013, I was working at the European Commission, actually as a head of European Commission representation in Latvia. And at that time, we were engaged into TTIP, or Transatlantic Trade and Investment Treaty, okay, which is, I don't know, maybe the young generation don't remember, but it was abbreviation TTIP. And everybody was very enthusiastic about the prospects of this potential agreement, and the hope was very high. But what happened then, actually in 2016, the negotiations were ended. And in 2018, President Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum for Europe. I don't think it was a very good decision, but anyhow, President Biden actually suspended the decision later on in 2001. But of course, in this situation, the TTIP negotiations became senseless and were officially suspended in 2019. And who could imagine in 2019 that a year later, we will live in a totally different world. The world which is was confronted with a pandemic crisis. And then, exactly during pandemic crisis, everybody realized how fragile are trade and supply chains. And this globalization concept, globalization philosophy appeared to be unsustainable. It was unsustainable because we lack elementary things like protection masks, like hand sanitizers, like ventilators, like batteries, and I can continue this list of shortages. And what's next? Actually, next it was the war situation, the war in Europe and Russian invasion of Ukraine, with terrible economic consequences, including energy and gas war and high prices and skyrocket prices on liquefied gas. Well, anyhow, we survived. But what is the conclusion? The conclusion, of course, was that something should be done different in the trade, in the international trade. And you mentioned, Barry, tomorrow summit in Washington D.C. And we expect that the U.S. and the EU will build sort of protective fence against non-market economics like China. On steel and aluminium, raising the tariffs or duties 25% on steel and 10% on aluminium. Of course, it is a very decisive move toward protectionism from total liberal globalization. And it happens actually at the time when OECD issued warnings that there is overcapacity of steel on the planet, and because of a huge investment of China into industry and actually low demand because of general slowdown of the world economy. So given these signals, in my view, this decision of having this club is very well grounded.
Right.
Yeah.
So can I just...
Should I stop here for the moment?
For the moment, I'll come back.
Okay.
So much. Do you want to... your initial observations?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Coming from Poland, so you all may wonder if I will bring more European perspective or American perspective here. And actually, I'm hoping that with the summit that you both mentioned already, that both teams are listening to us, and hopefully they will bring some of our points to the final statement. But jokes aside, agreeing with completely everything that was said before, maybe just 2 things that I would like to bring to the discussion on some way that need to change in European thinking about the American thinking, because the way I see it right now about the US policy, but Biden policy factors that are actually driving this policy are two words, very simple: labor and workers. I mean, I see it pretty much everywhere, not only in Commerce Department, Treasury Department, Trade Representative Office, but especially in Joe Biden himself. I mean, if I don't want to talk about it that broader, but maybe just short example. Climate, the biggest climate package in the U.S. history, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. You have a lot of actions, like I said, the record value, but not at every cost. This is my perspective. Not at every cost. Joe Biden is not again on climate action at every cost, and especially not on the middle working class costs. He's fighting for the people. That's my that's my perspective. And to bring some examples from the IRA, administration with these tax breaks, with subsidies, they are encourage car industry to switch for electric vehicles production, of course, but it's not only about the tax breaks, not only about subsidies, but also about the orders from the administration to bring these vehicles to swap the production. But what he is doing, that's my perspective. So I'm happy if you disagree with it. What he is doing, he is investing in the industry, but at the end of the day, he's investing in the people. And of course, you can say that it's all about the politics, it's all about the elections. To some extent, every action that politician does is about the election, especially in the US when you have elections in every 2 years, presidential and every 4 years. But well, these are the long-term investments, and that's the issue for Biden, because I don't think that he takes the let's say the recognition of the actions that he actually is taking for the US economy. I mean, the approval for his economic actions are pretty much lower than the general approval, and it's still low for him as a US president. And if I may, staying with the car industry, what he did in the last month, joining the line of the protesters from the factories, I think it's unprecedented action to show that you are doing this working middle class. You are doing a great job. You deserve to gain more, to have more, and I'm fully supporting you. I think it's something that, I mean, it's the way of thinking of the US president and the whole administration. And this should be also recognized in the European Union, that this is the way of new thinking, and even you are okay with it, and you will understand it, and you will try to adjust to it, not to counter it, because this is not the way, not to counter it, but to just understand it and do something about it in the European term. That would be my starting point. Okay, Anna, you say
yeah, I just want to follow on what you were saying, and just to give you another example of the Inflation Reduction Act. Even though created some turbulence in the EU, in my opinion, it was, I agree with you that I think some of the countries from the EU needs to change their thinking, because they ought to see in US as a partner, not as a competitor. But you know, the concrete example with what Inflation Reduction Act was doing on the energy was that is helping the deployment of the SMRs in Europe and in our region, which again is coming back to security, because, and I'm not going to go on and on about the energy, but yes, energy, in my opinion, is just not just a basic human right, because it's providing you energy as a, you know, the basic right of living, but likewise is that matter of security. And you mentioned, you know, giving examples what happened when something is going wrong. But you know what didn't go wrong with, you know, out of the blue. It went wrong because people didn't plan properly and didn't listen to the voice, such as Romania, such as Poland and other countries in Central Eastern Europe, when we've been saying, watch out, because this could be used as a weapon, as a war weapon. Because, you know, it was quite funny that the Republic of Moldova, for example, and Romania was having the highest price of the gas from Russia, and another country, I'm not going to name it, was the cheapest, you know, got the cheapest price of the gas, you know, the same gas at the same day. So, you know, what is that telling you? It's telling you that this was used in terms of a policy and, you know, and that part of the hybrid war that we are living, which we should not allow it. And I will just give you, if I may, a few numbers, because you know, I think that's why I'm so grateful for putting up together this conference, because I think where it's missing is the information and the education, if I may say, of what this EU-US relationship, not just on the trade, but especially on the trade, because practically, the US investment in the EU is notably 4 times higher than in the Asian Pacific region, while the EU foreign direct investment in the US downfalls the combined EU investment in India and China by 10-fold. And I can go on with the concrete numbers. So what is that telling us? It's telling us that if we are partnering, of course, you will have areas where will you compete. But you know what? With the Inflation Reduction Act, I said, look, good that the US came up with such a policy, because it's going to force the EU to come up with a very competitive policy, pretty much on the same domain, but again, in partnership, not in a silly competition. It should be healthy competition, but not a competition that is destructive, because in the end of the day, EU and US is so linked. And I will just close just putting out, maybe you might want to comment on it. I think the work together that we can do in WTO is very important, because there has been some slowdowns, and I think that the partnership in the work that we could do together in the WTO will be very valuable as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, you know, it's you know, I think there's tying together a couple of the comments here, and I think that all 3 of these comments have been enormously important. What we're saying is, you know, when you see President Biden walking on the picket line of a strike, I mean, it is unprecedented, and it's a way of communicating to people that what we've been doing in the United States since early Reagan. It's over. We're done. We're not. The idea here is not to crush the American workers, nor is it to crush the European workers. American workers don't win if European workers are being crushed. And you know, so I think there's a so what you're saying here is this pretty important statement, also that has to do with the politics in our nations, which is that why have we seen this disruption? There's a number of reasons why we've seen this disruption to our democracies in the last few years. You know, part of it is actually the platforms, the social media platforms. It's Google, it's Facebook, the way they manage communications, the way their business models disrupt communications, and pushes extreme positions on society. But what also, there was a legitimate anger in the United States among working people at this status quo. You know, when you look at the people who voted for Trump in 2016, it's like a lot of those people, you know, it's like there was a real legitimate anger. When you see some of the you know, the anger that's been expressed here in Europe, it's the same thing as legitimate anger. And actually, so one of the ways that you actually help to re-establish democracy on a stable footing is you make sure that everybody has a good job, a well-paying job, that societies aren't becoming more and more unequal, but are becoming more and more equal.
That's great. And I think you wanted to intervene. Yeah.
Well, I would like to continue this analysis of Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually a very big, comprehensive document, but I will comment only on subsidies. And this is exactly why the European Commission and EU is some sort of concern. The subsidies, actually, the amount of subsidies is quite huge. It's around $369 billion to my memory. Well, it's linked to green industries, green technologies, and this is, of course, excellent idea because we all should try to transfer our economy into climate-neutral economy, and technologies is excellent. But the problem is that because of these subsidies, some sort of European companies are suffering because investments are redirected toward the US, which is obvious. And I will give you one example with batteries. As far as this investment into batteries technologies are concerned, in 2002 compared to 2001, the share of this investment, battery-related investment in Europe, dropped from 42% to 2%. Okay, so it's enormous drop. But you are absolutely right that because the US is applying sort of protectionism policy, Europe should do similar thing. And that's why European Union adopted this Green Deal industrial plan with two components or two parts. One is Critical Raw Material Act, and second is Zero Technologies something Act, Zero Technology Industry Act. Okay, yeah. And there are also a lot of instruments to facilitate green investments, and but as far as financing is concerned, is much less. I mean, incomparable. It's about 92 billion compared with for 3 years compared with 369. Okay, it's 1/3, no, even less, 1/4. And the problem is that even this money is not envisaged in the European Commission budget, so it's not very clear whether even this amount will be collected. I mean, it's not that easy to respond in a symmetric way. It is not that easy, but of course the European Union is trying to do its best. And what I'm very proud that Latvian politician Valdis Dombrovskis is vice executive vice chair of the European Commission, and his domain, his portfolio is exactly about trade. So he's now, I assume, in DC. And there are many initiatives ongoing and many consultations, very intensive consultations with the US within Trade and Technology Council, with 10 working group. I mean, there are
you know, I actually do think, I mean, it's and I'm sorry, but there is like I mentioned BASF before, right? And it's like, this is actually an area where Europeans actually need to wake up. Because it's like, you're looking at the United States and saying, oh, they're subsidizing. And so in these future industries, this is going to be a problem. And here you have this enormously important industry, which is chemicals, where we are not getting rid of the chemicals that are BASF anytime soon. And yet, so you have this complex which employs thousands of people. And right now, because there's this residual thinking about we just need to let the corporations do what they want, right now no one has taken the steps to block BASF from moving to China. And it's like, so when BASF moves to China, it drags all of those jobs. It drags the cluster jobs that are around the plant to China. So it's like, before we complain too much about, you know, sort of these subsidies, it's like, I would say, protect what you already have. Don't lose it. Because you're just digging yourself into a hole, and also we should understand that as we move to break these other choke points, this is really important. We have a shortage of workers in the United States. We have a shortage of workers in Europe who are trained up to the kind of industrial activity that we want to be engaging in as we go forward. It's like, the problem is not that the problem is that not that there's enough factories. It's that there's going to be too many factories that need to be staffed. Now we need to be thinking about, how are we going to staff, how are we going to man, put people into these factories, and so that's the future. If we take the steps necessary to make ourselves secure, breaking choke points in China, that means more factories here than we have the ability to staff right now.
Sure, Anna,
can I give you a concrete example following what you were saying? In 2019, Romania took the decision to break away. So we have on the nuclear, and by the way, you are a little bit older than my son, and I would like to say to you, please try to understand that the energy from nuclear is one of the cleanest sources of energy, and that's science, is not politics, and we can discuss if you have any other questions. So because I want to give this concrete example. We, in Romania, as I mentioned, we have already functioning 2 nuclear power plants, and we are building 2 more, plus we are the first country in Europe to deploy the SMR with the American technology, NuScale technology. And so in 2019, we took the decision to break away from the China investment in the 2 new reactors, because they were there to practically just block the project, okay? I can say this on the record. I know I've been involved as a Minister of Justice in those discussions. And what was happening, following what you were saying, Barry, and that's why I'm not agreeing that we should look at the EU, at the US as the competitor. No, we should look at as a partner and take advantage where we can. So by deploying the first SMR in Europe, Romania has a very, very good chance to be the hub in manufacturing and securing the supply chain for everything is going to do with the SMR. Same with the research and development, with the R&D. We just already put in Nuclear Electrica, which is the company that is operating those nuclear power plants. We put already, with the help of the US and with the Department of Energy and the Department of State, with NuScale technology, we already did a simulator. What are we doing? We are investing and we are training the ones that the workforce that will be operating operating the other SMRs. So this is just a concrete example where you could see the benefits of just partnering with the US. And again, I'm going to go on and on about how important is the presence of the US in Central Eastern Europe in terms of the energy, okay? Being on a traditional type of energy or the more new coming technologies such as the SMRs, because that is, is not just, and for the ones that are looking at us, I can give them a tip. It's a very good market. It's around 140 billion euros, because most of the countries had the Russian technology when it comes to the nuclear, for example. But likewise, it's that policy that will be securing those countries for having that resilience, Barry, that you were talking about, of not allowing somebody to just play out of the blue with your national security by using the energy. Exactly. So, let's take advantage of the opportunities that are coming from this cooperation, instead of just, poking the nose and say, oh, you've done that reduction inflation act, we should just be all upset about it. No, come up with very creative ideas where you could take the opportunities, and including investing and become competitive from the human resources point of view. Because guess what? US is giving you an opportunity to go and get educated in the United States, but then it's for your country, for Europe, to make you come back to your home country and contribute. Otherwise, they will give you that good opportunity to work on Wall Street, for example.
Yeah. Thank you. No.
Yeah. Well, of course, EU and US are alliance, and they should continue to be alliance, and I cannot imagine what would happen if our partnership would break somehow. But at the same time, trade is about competition. We are competitors also, yeah? And this is normal. This is, it's unavoidable. And when you mentioned that some investments are directed toward China, but not only, some investments are going exactly from Europe are redirected toward the US. And I will give you an example with the chemical industry. You mentioned chemical. Multinational company, Solvay, decided to invest not to Europe, but to the United States. Volkswagen also reconsidered its investment policy and decided to move the US. It's not about criticism. It's just reality.
Sticks.
It's just
reality.
You
need bigger sticks. It's what happened for the last 30, 40 years in the United States, and then more and more so in Europe. What we did is we created policy entirely around carrots. That's what it's like, oh, we don't want to interfere in what the decisions by corporations, except we're going to throw little carrots around and maybe they'll come graze over here. It's like you need a bigger stick. And it's like if you need to force a corporation, especially a European one, to invest or to stay, use a stick. And it's like use tariffs. It's like this is von der Leyen's been very she stepped out and she said, you know what, if we need to use stronger tariffs against against China to protect the car industry, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use tariffs. That's a stick.
Yeah. So one of the things about it which I don't think is entirely appreciated is that there is a kind of sense that, well, it'd be unfair to do anything to China because it's competition. Mm-hmm. But of course, what is not understood is that the extent to which the Chinese economy is not run on anything like ordinary market terms. So the thing to understand is that why it makes it attractive for BASF, it's not just the fact that energy prices are higher in Europe. It's the amount of free stuff that the Chinese state and the Chinese local governments and the Chinese financial system will deliver to BASF or to any European company. So you're not talking about a legitimate playing field. It's not like having an argument between the Europeans and Americans about a tariff level, where basically, okay, there are some differences, but it's basically two functioning market economies. You've got a non-functioning, into market terms, economy, which is quite large, and which is able to direct support to specific industries to acquire as much technology and business as they think they need to do, and to create the choke points. So I think one of the problems here conceptually is to understand with China is you're not dealing with a market. That is the first thing to understand, and I think that is the difficulty with. I think the justification for using the big stick is partly to do with that reality. Shortly,
I think there's also in this issue about market economy. It's we in Europe and in the United States, we would be lying to ourselves if we say that we have actually had a properly functioning market economy in either place for the last 30 years, especially in the United States. When you actually get rid of your anti-monopoly law, and we in the United States got rid of our anti-monopoly law, we de facto suspended it in the 1980s. We are only reestablishing it now. What you do is you allow the biggest of the big to rule. And that's what has happened. So it's like this is not a market economy because markets require carefully structured rules. And we have not had those rules. We just allowed rule of the big. So this is what we have, you know, so we have a problem at home, which is the rule by monopoly, and then we have a problem abroad, which is ruled by mercantilists, as Alan was saying, you know, ruled by the Chinese state. So we are fighting on a two-front war. We're fighting the monopolists at home, and we're fighting the mercantilists abroad. And it's one and the same fight. And actually, I would strongly urge everybody here to read the recent speech which U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai delivered. This was June 15th, 2023. We hosted that speech in Washington, D.C. And that speech, what it does is it brings together trade policy and competition policy in a way that is unprecedented in the last 40 years. It's really worth reading that speech. That's the foundation on which we're going to rebuild this understanding of how we beat the monopolists at home, including Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and we beat the mercantilists abroad. It's all one fight.
Yeah, and what you were saying, Alan, and picking up of what you were saying, Brent, from the very beginning, that the trade is about security. Let's not forget the example with the 5G. Okay, yeah. So that's why, in my opinion, I think the EU and US should strongly, closely collaborate on the strategic domains where, you know, it's not just about the economics, but it's about the security with everything that security is covering, meaning at large, including your, you know, the way your society is developing in terms of the democracy. Okay. So, you know, the example with the 5G, the way the 5G, you know, from China, they wanted to use it to practically tackle into your security system. And I'm very proud to say that, you know, Romania again and a lot of EU countries, but we were among the first who actually, we adopted a memorandum which we officially banned the 5G use, you know, from Chinese companies in Romania because it was a matter of security.
Yeah, it's interesting, this point about security, that it applies to so many of the markets. I mean, I say at the beginning, Barry talked about choke points. And another choke point, which I think I just use this because the statistic is kind of staggering. So, and I've now double and triple checked this, and Barry can tell me if I'm wrong, but I understand that around 90% of all of the ingredients for medicines in the world, so the chemical ingredients, 90% are produced in China. Yeah. And that is a security threat. You cannot have an authoritarian state who does not mean us well to be able to produce 90% of all the ingredients for all the medicines used on Earth. This is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, we actually were talking before about what happened, you know, the learning about Putin's control over oil and gas and what that means. You know, this is a lever. This is when Putin has his hand on the spigots that control the oil and gas, he has a rope around your neck. Yeah. But that is actually what China has around our necks right now because of their control over the ingredients that go in our drugs. They can turn that off tomorrow. Now, this is an area where Europe is actually in advance of the United States on policy. There has been a lot of efforts in the European, across the European Union to start to address, Macron has been very strong on this, start to address this choke pointing of capacity for the making of the ingredients that go in our drug supply. The United States has been slow on this. So this is, you should understand that there's a lot of the vanguard thinking is taking place right here, but this is something that we must address. And here's a case in which we must address the choke pointing because of the threat to our most vital security, but at the same time, that gets into this issue of jobs. Yeah. Because we have to get those capacities, not entirely out of China, but largely out of China, but we have to put them somewhere, and then we have to staff them.
Yeah, actually, I fully agree that the EU is doing a lot, not only with this maybe lack of subsidies or European funds, but with identifying 34 critical mineral materials and benchmarks which should be achieved by 2030, meaning processing, refining and mining, okay? And also, 10% for mining, 15% for recycling, and 40-something% for processing, okay? And then EU also introduced sort of ban for import of these critical materials from the third countries, like 65%, not more, from one single country. It's still a lot, but some raw materials, also are mined only in a limited number of countries. So I think it is quite a decisive step toward, well, it's of course protectionism, but I think fully justified.
That's great. That's just you.
Yeah, if I may bring a short point on, well, China actually, the topic of our discussion. Yeah. Also the challenges for the relations between the EU and the US, and of course China will be, but the EU approach to China, I think, will be one of the most important challenges, because right now, like you said, it's pretty good shape because of the von der Leyen. But is the approach the same in every European capital? Of course not. Compare, for example, Bucharest and Berlin, and you will have like great differences or a fight even. And this may change after the European elections in 2024. And this, I think, may be some difficulty to bring the EU and the US on the same table regarding the coordination policy with on China.
And that goes for the Russia as well.
Well, definitely, yeah.
But investment screening and strategic project definition of this, it seems to me this on the table for negotiation between the EU and US. So maybe it will help, but it depends. Of course, it depends on the election.
Can I just see if we got any questions from the audience? I'd rather go for the questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions? The lady in the white.
There is one, I think.
There is. There's a microphone, I think, coming. Give your name and institution if you have one, sir.
My name is Antonia Pup. Yeah, I hope it's working now.
Yeah, it is now, yeah.
My name is Antonia Pup, and I'm part of the Future Leaders Forum at the Riga conference, but I come from Romania. Yeah. My question is regarding the European Union position on China, and namely, I'm talking about critical technologies and the fact that even though in our discourses, we seem to have a very staunch approach on China's involvement in our critical infrastructures. In reality, EU just launched its list of critical technologies. 5G is not among them. We do not have a consensus at the European Union level when it comes to technologies that are at risks, and 5G is, of course, one of the examples in that regard. And my question is, how can we really put more pressure on the European Union's leadership to see the way that the economy and the security are so much intertwined right now, and what clear policy can we advance towards that? Is like having a foreign investment screening mechanism proposed at the European Union or for the European Union's member states one that can be inspired from US, a type of policy we can use, or perhaps you have other ideas that can be proposed? Thank you.
Okay, does anyone want to look at that? Shall we, perhaps Ina and then Barry?
Well, just very quick reaction. Actually, you ask how to put pressure on the European Union, but European Union and all, institutions are taking decisions based on the member states. So you should put the pressure on your member state, on your governments. It depends on elections. It depends on negotiations. You know, European Commission is acting on behalf of consensus between the member states. So it's quickly.
Barry?
Yeah.
No.
Actually, I've spent a lot of time in Brussels engaging with directly with a number of the DGs there, and there's a choke point problem in Europe and European politics. It's like a lot of the DGs are not actually listening to the member states. If you look on some tech policy, where Germany is, where France is, it's like DG Comp is way behind. When it comes to trade policy, DG Trade way behind. So there's a choke point problem here, a political choke point, which is that the DGs in Europe, not all of them, but DG Comp, DG Trade, they're still run by neoliberals. They're still run by people who are thinking the way Reagan was thinking in the 1980s, or the way Clinton was thinking in the 1990s. That is a major problem for Europe, and it's like there's a new commission coming up, and it's like now is the time to be demanding that the new commission moves towards the new thinking, which is really the old thinking when it comes to trade, when it comes to competition, and when it comes to security. Now is the time to do it, and this is something where every one of you can actually, if they're supposed to listen to you, you got to make them listen. Drive the neoliberals out of Brussels. Tomorrow, Thierry Breton, I think, is speaking here. Thierry Breton is he's on the right side on this. He needs your help.
Okay, Anna.
Great question. Foarte bună întrebarea. Mulțumesc frumos. A couple of points. Firstly, yes, you're right, in theory. But likewise, in too many examples, unfortunately, the interests of the national, so certain member states were pushed at the EU level, and that's, in my opinion, I think is becoming very dangerous. Of course, you are promoting the interests of your member state, of your state. But likewise, when it comes to the EU, I think on the strategic domains, on the security domains, we should have the interest of the EU at heart, because otherwise things can go off track quite easily, especially that is fueling the upcoming extremists and the populists you see it rising in all the countries, including in my own country. I mean, and that's why my worry, and I'm looking to you especially in the room, to really fight hard to not have a very populist turnout as a result of the upcoming EU elections. I am a little bit worried about, the upcoming EU election, because I saw it in the fight of the taxonomy. For the ones that you are not familiar, briefly, taxonomy was a big fight where you practically included gas and nuclear to be helped with certain financial tools that will make it competitive, okay? And I never saw, in my political life, I saw quite a few disinformation campaign, manipulation, and so on and so forth. I never saw one so big until the very final vote, because Putin and his gang, and I can say it on the record, couldn't give up to not let go of the energy. And it was a big fight. We won it. That was something, but every single vote counted. So yes, you are very right that I think, and in my opinion, at the EU level, on the strategic domains, you should leave aside just your immediate interest as a member state and to look overall, because in the end of the day, it's paying off for everybody. And I can salute, for example, one decision that was taken by the Commission, where it allowed the member states to come up with the mix on the energy according to the realities on the ground of the member states. Because, for example, in Romania, I can wish to have energy from solar, okay? But guess what? It's not the same amount of the solar in Romania that is in Greece or in Spain or in Portugal. So that's another concrete example where I think it was quite good wisdom at the Commission.
Okay, can I just give the last minute or so to Barry? Do you have any kind of sort of recommendations for the European Union in trade? What they should do?
Well, I'd say, I mean, two, actually. I think it's, first recommendation would be, when you're dealing with the United States, is not to push the United States to go slower, it's to push the United States to go faster. The faster the United States goes, the faster Europe gets to go, the faster we all get to a place where we have true security, and the kind of security that actually helps us, you know, ensures that we don't have the kind of problems we saw with the COVID. We don't have the kind of supply chain problems we saw with semiconductors as last year. We don't have this threat of Putin turning off the crank or the PRC turning off the crank of semiconductors. We cannot live with those kind of threats. Push the United States to go much faster, much further. Second, understand that what we're doing here is we're moving back towards a system, an open world system. We can, if we do this with a vision, we can actually build a system that is not just good for the United States and Europe and Japan, just, you know, G7 nations, industrial democracies. We can build a system that works for South Africa and India and Brazil and Indonesia and Vietnam. It's like we, you know, doing this right, actually, we end up with a world system that brings the people of the world back together to allow us to work and fight together against the truly great challenges of our time, which have to do with climate and have to do with sustainability.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the whole panel. Thanks very much. That's very perfect.